Good morning. It is Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, 11:45 a.m. Eastern, 8:45 Pacific, broadcasting live from Toronto. This is the Mothcast. Coming up, we're going to be talking about federal government tried to legislate Air Canada workers back to work. And the union said, no way. So we're going to be talking a bit about that. Till about 12:30, and then we'll be heading over to the Majority Report for the American story. I just wanted to flip back over because we just saw a live look there from the CN Tower cam looking west towards the airport in Humber River. We just saw for a moment there's some folks doing the CN Tower walk, which, if you don't know, is something you can do. You go up onto, it'll take you up on the CN Tower there on like the, on top of the rotunda, and you're harnessed in, and you do a walk around the edge. You kind of lean over the edge a bit, fully relying on the strength of the harness to hang you in there while you're about 500 meters-ish above the ground, which is, for those of you who use the Imperial system still, is about 1,600 feet in the air. So we got to get a live look there of some folks doing it. And had a friend of ours did the CN Tower walk a couple weeks ago, and she said, as you could probably imagine, it is certainly a rush. It's pretty. I don't know if I'm brave enough to do it, but kudos to those folks for doing it. So thanks so much for tuning in to the Mothcast on this Tuesday. It's a bit of a gray and cool one out there today. Got some gray skies. There might be a little bit of rain. Trickled through earlier this morning. It's about 18, 19 degrees right now in the city. It's feeling more like early October or late September than it does mid-August, or I guess late August now at this point. So as mentioned at the top here, today we're going to be talking about the ongoing labor action by the union representing Air Canada flight attendants. As you know, the union went on strike as of Saturday morning. We talked a bit about this on Thursday, sort of what some of the things that were at issue are. Things like pay, hours. The big thing really being the pay structure of flight attendants. They're only paid for, their time in the air. And the pay itself, even then, is not great given the hours that they have to work, especially, and with, particularly with, the situation that has been, at Pearson for the past little while now. Although it has improved, delays have been pretty regular and lengthy, which means they are doing mandatory labor for no pay if the plane is still on the ground. So it went on strike as of this weekend. I believe it was just maybe yesterday. It looks like it may have been Sorry, it wasn't yesterday. It was on Saturday. The federal government opted to step in to attempt to legislate the workers back on the job. The Jobs and Families Minister Patty Hajdu invoked Section 107 of the Canadian Labour Code, which gives the minister power to essentially require workers on strike to return to the job. And the union said no. The union refused the order. And it was quoted as saying in a report from the Toronto Star, Union President Mark Hancock said, "If it means jail, so be it." So yeah, personally, I think that's a pretty great and pretty great, courageous statement there from the union president, that they are refusing the government's attempt to force an end to this strike with no thus have them back on the job with no resolution. They would have effectively no contract if they were to return to work, and so it's pretty commendable on the union's part to just say nope, sorry. Especially because Air Canada already had not been coming to the table in good faith. They had, they had walked away from negotiations. They tried to bring in arbitration, like federal government arbitrators, and we're not, like I said, negotiating with Air Canada workers in good faith. And so Air Canada, the union representing those Air Canada workers said, well, if you're not here in good faith, we won't bother listening to you. And I think in that case, fair's fair. Minister Hajdu released a pretty lengthy statement, about this, now that the strike is now declared unlawful and that the union has refused the return to work order. I think this part of the statement here kind of talks a bit about what we were talking about towards the end of Thursday's stream. The enormous impact of a nationwide labor disruption of this scale is already being felt by Canadians and visitors to our country. This impact will grow significantly with a prolonged dispute. The nationwide labor disruption is impeding the movement of passengers and critical cargo. In a year in which Canadian families and businesses have already experienced too much disruption and uncertainty, this is not the time to add additional disruptions to their lives and our economy. Now, if you remember from the end of Thursday's stream, I just sort of was, pointing out that watch the narrative as it develops around this, especially going into this past weekend and today, sort of how this situation gets painted in terms of blame, and in terms of who seemed to be at fault, who seemed to be the party that's impeding things, or the party that is creating this, responsible for this situation. And I told you that despite the reality being it is Air Canada that is responsible for the situation, that instead the blame will be put on the workers, and that's exactly what we're seeing here with this statement. Because Minister Hajdu here is, attempting to justify legislating workers back on the job by saying, look, this creates enormous disruption. This is a major air carrier here, responsible for moving lots of passengers and critical cargo. Cargo and goods and whatnot. That's critical to the economy. That's already seen a lot of instability. Last year or so, in particular, or the last even 6-7 months. And that being a reason why she would legislate them back to work. But again, we come back to the reality of the situation here, which is clearly the labor provided by flight attendants who are now on strike, as evidenced by Minister Hajdu's statement. Don't take my word for it. Is of great value to the functioning of the Canadian economy, to the movement of people and cargo around the country or around the continent or overseas. Like we said last stream, Air Canada is the largest foreign air carrier servicing the United States. And so the labor of these flight attendants, of these crew members, provides great value to the functioning of our economy, and the union wants to see fair compensation for that and fair treatment for that. That they're paid for the time they are on the job and working. That they are given proper. They are working proper hours, that they're not being overworked, that they are not being compelled to work in unsafe conditions, which, I mean, I may be a radical, but I think that's a pretty fair ask. And Air Canada has done everything to skirt around having to do any of that, having to take any responsibility for that. When it is, in fact, Air Canada who has the power in this situation. And so the workers have said, well, we're not coming back to work if you're not willing to come to the table. And more to the point, this is what the point of strikes are. The point of strikes is the work stoppage, because the work stoppage is sort of, the purpose is kind of twofold. First, it is just like the visibility of it, that through like the inconvenience or through the disruption, where it's like, oh, I had a flight to go out west to see my family with Air Canada. I can't do that now because there is a labor strike, so there are no flights running right now. So that from the visibility point of view, but the kind of more latent function latent, or depending on who you ask, could be the more latent function. This could be sort of more the first order function. But the other function is demonstrating the value of that labor via its absence. So it's kind of saying, look, you actually need us, and we have leverage that should compel you to come to the table and negotiate, because if we're not here doing our jobs, the enormous impact of a nationwide labor disruption of this scale is already being felt by Canadians and visitors to our country. The nationwide labor disruption is impeding the movement of passengers and critical cargo in a year in which Canadian families and businesses have already experienced disruption and uncertainty. Canadians rely on air travel to connect families, workers, and communities to each other and the world. So if they're not on the job, none of that's happening. So, and, I think it's also worth looking too at, I mentioned that Minister Hajdu invoked Section 107 of the Canadian Labour Code, and we'll just sort of have a look at it here. So 107 says, the minister, where the minister deems it expedient, may do such things as to the minister seem likely to maintain or secure industrial peace and to promote conditions favorable to the settlement of industrial disputes or differences, and to those ends the minister may refer any option to the board or direct the board to do such things as the minister deems necessary. So all that to say, the minister has kind of absolute power to do whatever is needed or necessary to resolve labor disputes. The language is interesting here because it says to secure industrial peace and to promote conditions favorable to the settlement of industrial disputes. How legislating workers back on the job without a negotiated contract or even a tentative agreement to then be going to ratification. I'm unclear as to how that promotes favorable conditions to the settlement of industrial disputes, because what this does is it just sort of reinforces that the government is actually not there on the side of the workers. Government is there on the side of capital, in this case, Air Canada. And so the language there is interesting because that's often not what happens in practice. This isn't like the minister comes in in some sort of referee position and says, okay, guys, look, let's figure this out. Let's give and take, blah, blah, blah. No, it's whatever corporation comes to the government and says, we actually don't want to deal with this. Can you just force them back to work? And the government says, for show, they kind of hum and haw and wring their hands a bit, and, they kind of run the clock a little bit, but then eventually they'll come in and just send them back to work without any sort of, regardless if negotiations have happened, regardless if there's any kind of agreement that's come to, even if tentative, let alone an actual contract that's been agreed upon. And this is fairly common. You see this quite often this is usually used more often with, with teachers union strikes, with, this happened before the TTC here in Toronto, our public transit service. The TTC was deemed a essential service during the COVID pandemic. When TTC strikes had happened in the past, the minister would come in and legislate the workers back on the job. So this is not. I'm not clear as to how often this has been used in specifically the case of airline crews, but overall, this is usually how it operates, and I just think the language in there is interesting because it sort of whitewashes what the actual, or sanitizes what the actual kind of intent in practice is behind that power the minister has. So sort of kind of, the kind of the in a nutshell here, the main thing is as is evidenced in Hajdu's statement, as is evidenced by the fact Air Canada is a major air carrier. The workers, the labor provided by the workers that are work as crews on these aircraft, that labor creates a lot of value. That as we talked about before, this is like kind of a critical infrastructure of Canada. In general, transportation, mass long distance transportation is critical infrastructure off, for like the unity of a particular country, just like the economic functioning or economic health of a country. And so the workers are leveraging that power they have because they're not properly being compensated based on the value they provide. And so they are leveraging the power they have in that you'll feel it if they're not coming into work. You will feel it. I think too, what's interesting too is this is clearly not clearly Air Canada can afford to do this. This is not like Air Canada is struggling for cash as one of the largest air carriers in North America. See here, this is from Air Canada itself. Air Canada, this is from their fourth quarter and full year 2024 financial reporting. And so here you can see Air Canada achieved record annual revenues in 2024 of $22.3 billion. I'm just trying to find their where their net net income for 2024 was about 1.3 billion, for Q4 alone, it looks like, so that the last few months of fiscal year 2024 looks like they netted net cash flows from operating activities 677 million. So they raked in 677 million in profit in just Q4 alone, and for 2024 they raked in $3.9 billion in profit. And just this year in 2025, they released the second quarter financial results at the end of July here. They saw an increase in revenue, a 2% increase in revenue over 2024, probably for like the same period in 2024, and so operating revenues are $5.6 billion. And it looks like they raked in $895 million in profit, so just nearly $1 billion in profit, just in the second quarter of 2025 alone, which I believe. I'm just trying to see if they specify, because sometimes fiscal years don't always line up with the calendar year. But this looks like it's fiscal. Okay, so it's like fiscal year ending June, or fiscal quarter, ending June 30th, which means Q2 was March to June. Point being, they are raking in record revenues, at least as we saw there for 2024, and $1 billion, $3 billion in profit. Net cash flow from operating activities. So that's the money that revenues from operation minus the costs. Of operating. So, yeah, billions. So, and then just to kind of there was something else interesting that I also want to note as well. Is the this may not surprise you necessarily, but just that Air Canada has been doing stock buybacks where they buy up their own stock to basically they buy up their own stock to create scarcity or to manipulate the number of shares available, which then impacts the stock price. The legality of this, I'm not sure. I think in the U.S. this might be illegal. I'm not sure in Canada what the law actually specifies around doing stock buybacks, or if this counts as doing sort of stock manipulation or what have you. But in June of 2025, so just towards the end of their second quarter, they announced Air Canada today announced the expects to take up and pay for 26 million shares at $18.80 per share, representing about $500 million in stock being purchased. So they are taking their the money that they're bringing in from as a consequence of operating, instead of that money, instead of being going towards properly paying their crews or pilots or what have you, it's instead going to, they're using it to buy their own shares. Spending $500 million to purchase their own shares, and which means that they can cancel those shares. They can, choose to reissue those shares at another time. So the point being of all this, like, why am I talking about their profits and now the stock buybacks? The point being is, when I say that Air Canada has the power here to actually properly compensate the workers for their labor, what that actually means in practice is what we're talking about here. Is the fact that they raked in just the second quarter alone this year about $1 billion in profit, and that at the end of that second quarter, they had spent $500 million buying their own shares. And I'm just curious how that may have they note it here in their report here for Q2, the completion of a $500 million substantial issuer bid with approximately $296 million total issued in June 2025. So this basically, what we're seeing here is, and this isn't shocking news, but this is sort of how this works in practice, where money that could have gone to paying workers properly and avoiding the situation in the first place is instead going to help line the pockets of the executives and or board members and or owners of Air Canada to increase the payout, the dividends for the equity that any of those senior level or owner level folks will receive from the ownership of their shares in the company. And so this is no small piece of the pie that Air Canada has spent on their shares. About 8.24% of the total number of Air Canada's shares are expected to be purchased. And it looks like from the language, because it says Air Canada announced the preliminary results to purchase of the now expired substantial issuer bid to purchase for cancellation up to 500 million of its Class A and Class B voting shares. And that Air Canada expects to take up and pay for 26 million of those shares. This which represents about 8.24% of those shares being issued. So that's where the money's going. That could have gone towards. Sorry, I know I'm a bit scatterbrained here, but that's where that money's going. Basically, it's going up. It's an upward transfer of wealth instead of what you'll often find. Neoliberals saying will happen if we unleash the power of the private sector, or of whatever, the private sector, or decrease the tax burden on corporations or whatever, is that money will trickle down and that a rising tide lifts all boats, blah blah blah. But this is actually what happens: is that money goes back to the top. It does not, no worker is seeing any part of that $500 million, which for Q2 was about, represents about half of their profit margin. But in terms of their it represents about half of their profit margin, but it represents, it's about 10% of their expenses for Q2. But the point being is this is how, when I say when Air Canada has the power and they're choosing not to properly compensate workers, this is what I'm talking about. Just had a little technical difficulty there. But I think we're okay. And so with this, and then the fact that the government steps in for the purpose of protecting the interests of capital, because the interests of capital and the interests of government are often aligned, because you often have the same kinds of folks, moving from managerial or ownership classes in the private sector to government, often for the purpose of self-enrichment through manipulation of tax policy and spending and what have you. This is how this all kind of works in concert, where at the end of the day, it is the capitalists, and I mean capitalists as in the people that own capital, that own units of production, that own airlines, or if they don't own airlines, they have some kind of equity stake in an airline as, part of their compensation package, which, usually comes at, if you're not on a board, if you're some kind of executive, if you're the CEO, that kind of thing, you're a vice president, usually I think too. It is those folks whose interests are protected at the end of the day, and whose interests, those are also, it's only their interests that they care about. And they are fine to, wait out a strike. They are fine to continue dealing with the government to compel workers back to work. They may, it's likely that they will probably bring in scabs at some point, or try to bring in scabs at some point to cover the labor shortage to get planes running again. It'll be interesting to see how that sort of goes. It's possible too that, now I haven't seen this as a stated anywhere, except for in the rhetoric of the union president. But if they, it's not unlikely, although I haven't seen it stated, that at some point it's possible they may make use of police forces to break up picket lines. Not that we necessarily may see people go to jail, but we may see picketers subject to state violence in a more kind of direct, kinetic capacity, as opposed to like the economic violence that they're already subjected to now. So that's kind of where things stand, and all of that to say, just I wish all the success to these to the workers striking right now, picketing, with the threat of the law being brought against them. It's brave and courageous, and this is just sort of, me wish casting a bit, but I think it'd be cool to see if, pilots went on, if, Air Canada pilots went on strike in solidarity with the airline attendants, but, who knows? That's, like I said, that's just kind of me wish casting. So I wish all the best and all the luck to Air Canada workers, and I hope they don't settle or stop until they get something of a fair deal. And I think it's great that it causes this much disruption, because this is how it is most visible. This is how the value that these workers provide is most visible, is when they're not there and things aren't working. And then it's clear why they should, where they're coming from when they say, we should be maybe seeing a little bit better compensation based on the value that we provide. And of course, under capitalism, no worker is actually ever paid the full value of their labor, of course, because otherwise then you don't make profit, right? Which is just to say, if I'm paid $4 to make a thing, and the company I made that thing for sells it for $10, that means, and that thing is purchased for $10, that means that thing, at least in the eyes of, the market, or the consumer is worth $10. Thus, the labor that I put into that product is $10, but that $6 is going back to the owner, who effectively just stole $6 of my wage or labor value from me. So, a good way to think of just markup on a product is it's more or less just kind of wage theft. So all that to say that just workers are never fully compensated for their labor under capitalism, because profit dictates that the owners leech off some of that labor value for just their own pockets. And like I said, no matter what the business is, they're not in the business of providing you whatever thing they're providing you with. They're in the business of making money. And that's how making money works. So, but that tangent, it's just to say that I hope that they at least get, they do get, that the workers are successful in getting, a bump in pay, getting full compensation for work, even if the plane is on the ground. That there is improvement to their working conditions and so on. So, so that's about where we are going to stop things for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Mothcast on this kind of dreary Tuesday. Still hovering around 18, 19 degrees out there at 12:30. Got some gray skies that are rolling in here. Looking west from the CN Tower cam. There it is. There's the platform there that you can do what I think they call it the edge walk. You can do the edge walk on. You can see that structure there. Those silver bars. That's where the harness is attached, and they walk out right here, I believe, and you can do a full walk around. Sort of a guided walk around. So that's where we're going to cut it for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in on this Tuesday. We're going to switch over now to the Majority Report for the American Story, and we will be back here on Thursday, and we will talk to you then. Thursday, 11:30. Thursday morning, 11:30 Eastern, 8:30 Pacific. Tell your friends. And as always, you can find the VOD for this episode or this stream on YouTube. If not this evening, tomorrow morning, where you can watch. Again, you can also follow me on TikTok. I think it's just Moth. I gotta get better at remembering these social media names. What's my name on TikTok? You can find me on TikTok at Mothass, M0TH_A55 on TikTok, where you can find clips of the stream. And I'm on Blue Sky, all that sort of linked in the profile. So thanks so much. We will see you Thursday.